reason why I chose to mentor was because so much of the information that I acquired was through privilege, right? And I kind of talked about this, right? I know we are in this current state, which is really continuous, right? But we're really in this current state where racial tension is at an all-time high. And for me, just kind of like growing up, I mean, it was there, but it wasn't so like in our faces. And I just really grew up privileged, right? And like, I know a lot of times because of the racial tension and so forth, like sometimes we don't realize as people of, I can't even say people of color, because you know what, that's a conversation for another day. But as Black people, we don't realize our privilege, right? We definitely embody the epitome of self-made, because from an ancestral standpoint, so much of what we are has been built off of the backs of our own labor, right? You call us a Negro, we turn it, make it nigga, we make it beautiful, right? We use it in terms of like, you know, people used it for endearment, but we turned around and used it for like brotherhood and you know what I mean? How it related to one another. Of course, some people still use it in a derogatory sense, but my overall point in even saying that is just more so like everything that people throw dirt on in Blackness, right? And just the labor that Black people have labored to build this country. We are really seen as people who are like self-made, right? We didn't come from that, right? And so, and I'm saying in terms of like America and like building American society. And so I think too often what we forget is our privilege. And when I talk about our privilege, I'm talking about people who have two parents, right? Who are married, right? People who come from a background of parents who are married, people who come from a background of a mother who went to college or a father who went to college. And this is very interesting because I remember being in high school and I remember filling out like the SATs and like just kind of going over a lot of like college applications and so forth and hearing about scholarships and all of these different things. And I remember really, that was the first time where I really started to realize my lack of resources and where I was not privileged in certain areas because, you know, it was like, do you come from a two-parent household, right? Like when you start filling out your information for scholarships and so forth. And I just realized that like Black people who are privileged, they don't get that. And I think because we do live in America where we have been slaves and we have been oppressed, and oppression is persisting, right? Like it's ongoing. This isn't something that's historical, even though it started, right? Like we understand its historical origins. It's something that is currently being perpetuated today, right? It's persistent, it's consistent. Racism is very much alive and real, and Black people are very much still being oppressed to this day. And I think what I found to be most common with a lot of people who kind of have this like more so annoyance in terms of like giving back or sharing certain information or being bothered by some things, I've always found it that these people carry that privilege, right? And they don't realize this privilege. And this is why I think it's so important. I say this all the time. I'm gonna say it again because it's important for y'all to stop taking y'all kids out here to the burbs and not letting them go see their cousins on the weekend. Okay, y'all need to stop doing that because y'all set people up to just not really have a clue what Black people go through, right? For me personally, growing up, being exposed to the deprivation, right? Being exposed to certain family members who did not have the privileges that I had, right? Learning from others. And honestly, I could just say it's probably God's anointing on me because I don't know what it was, but just nobody was telling me these things, right? But I grew up and I could very easily see how different it was for me in my life versus my cousins. You know, my mom was a nurse. She was a single mother, but she made a decent amount of money. You know, she had some type of trajectory in her life, right? She grew up with a grandmother who was very Christian based and faith based and so forth. You know what I mean? She grew up with siblings. She didn't grow up, and that's, you know, she was around that, but like overall her home base wasn't that. And so I just think that too often when Black people grow up with this privilege, they don't realize how privileged they really are. I don't think people realize the privilege in living in like LA, right? Like not only does it take financial financial opportunities, right? And I say LA more so because I think people sometimes look at people who live in LA like, oh, it's just this very simple thing of moving. No, right? I was talking to my little brother about this today, like, yo, when it comes to living in New York, a lot of times people glorify New York and they make it seem like New York is just this beautiful place, right? Empire State of Mind, okay, New York City of Dreams, like, and it's just this idolized thing. But New York is full of deprivation. Like, a lot of people in New York are poor. A lot of Black people in New York are struggling, right? Now, of course, this is the one city, right? The one state where it's like, you're never going to get another New York, right? There's no place like New York. And I suppose that, like New York, for New Yorkers, that's home, right? Like anyone else in their home state. So that's what you're used to. And again, there's no other place like it. So it's like there are some benefits in terms of culture, but there's a lot of poverty in New York City, right? There's a lot of deprivation in New York City. I think that New York City was definitely probably one of the hardest places, you know, in terms of the crack epidemic. And when it hit the States, right? When it hit impoverished Black communities, that I'm like, I don't have the statistics, but I'm pretty sure New York, in terms of like the crack epidemic and so forth, that hit Black families the most. And I know that impacted and affected them severely, right? And I just think that when you come up with privilege, you don't realize that, you know, and you may be privileged in the most subtle ways. I don't think people realize that there are people out here who have never had anyone tell them that they could be anything, right? When I look at Kanye West, I think about his mother, his father, the people he talked about who instilled those things in him when he was younger. These are things that we often take for granted as we get older. And when I see people who are in LA and doing certain things like that, like, they don't realize the privilege, right? And I just think too often, because we come from a culture of being self-made, we just completely forget about all the opportunities we've had along the way. And we get online and we speak so arrogantly, and we speak so like, you know, we generalize and we get annoyed with people and things like that. And it's just like, I don't think you realize it, you know? Now, I will say for myself, as far as like wasting time and things like that, of course I get it. I think for me personally, I'm very discerning. So I don't overgive, I don't overextend, I don't overshare, and I'm not the type of person to just keep letting someone eat out the palm of my hand. But I'm also not the type of person, if someone asks me something, I'm not the type of person to just make it this big old thing where I'm just like, oh my God, like, I'm moaning and groaning, and I'm making Instagram videos about how lazy people are, or you know what I mean? Now, I did have a tweet that I posted on Instagram and I said something about being lazy, but I was more so referencing to people who are genuinely lazy and who ain't trying. But I just think that having these conversations and getting online and sharing our woes or our frustrations, right, when we are in a really, really privileged position, right, when we're blessed, essentially, getting online and sharing like our negative opinions about stuff, I just think that could be very discouraging for people who are trying. And I think this is really going to bring home this podcast episode and my whole point of like, don't allow people to be your idol. You know, don't idolize anybody. Don't put people on a pedestal. Don't look up to people, like, period. Let people be. You tap into yourself and you find what you need for you, right? Like, I know for me, I always wanted a mentor. I always thought that. I was always looking for that. And now I'm more so in a space in my life where it's like, I'm so big on just getting to the root of me and tapping in with myself and being the mentor that I know that I could be to my younger self, right? And just realizing that in that, you know what I mean, kind of like dynamic, I am way more than enough. And it's really just kind of like validating myself, because we live in a culture today, people are selfish. I don't care what anybody says. I get it. Like, I know nobody wants to be out here wasting time. You know, have I found myself in a position where I feel like I was sharing information with someone, and I feel like they asked me a question and they're asking me questions and they're probing and so forth, and I'm sharing all this information and they do nothing with it. Have I found myself in that situation one time? Yes. But I think for me, and this is going to be a bit controversial and a little bit even like taboo, I looked at it like, okay, this person just found out some information about this industry that I'm in, and they're probably not interested in doing that, you know? And maybe I just gave this person a bit of a gateway pass to where they don't have to go through that. I think too often with people who come from deprived communities, the reason why we don't really want to quote unquote see each other win is because we had the struggle. And I think that people who feel like they had the struggle, they want others to struggle. And I don't like that. I really don't. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that we should be out here giving handouts, but I just think it's really something said about the climate of like people today in mass who want other people to struggle because they had to struggle. That's just weird to me. That's really weird to me. And like I said, I'm not opposed, but I just think that when it comes to like mentorship and all those things are overlooked because people are selfish and people don't realize their privilege. I know for myself, having a father in my life, like I didn't have our relationship was very imperfect, but when I'm talking from a very healed, whole and healthy perspective. For me, I realized the blessing that it was to have a father. And I realized for women who don't have that, how different that is. So who am I to get up here and say, you know what I mean? And I just think that when I look back at my life, I look at it with so much gratitude because it's like, these are not only humbling experiences, but that wasn't something that I did. That wasn't something that I cultivated. And I think when you don't have that social awareness, when you don't have that range and diversity, and you don't really have the education in regards to Black history and just culturally, right, what we are deprived of in our communities, fatherhood being one of the most prominent things, it's easy for you to get online and share these opinions about what you don't want to do and what you don't want to give and how other people need to X, Y, and Z when you ain't never really seen what it's like out here. People are very self-absorbed. And the thing about privilege for a lot of people is that you can't see it. So it's like people are blindsided. It's like you can't see that you had both of your parents who were guiding you to this path, or you had a mother and a father who come from this collegiate background who were guiding you to this path. You know what I mean? You can't see that. You're really blindsided. So it's important to just not really put anybody on a pedestal, because, at times we can all really get beside ourselves and kind of start talking out the side of our necks, or, we can just be in a space in our lives where it's like we're annoyed, we're stressed, and we go online out of emotion and we share an opinion that could really offend some people who are out here trying. I know for myself, being the type of person who does work really hard and who is always willing to try, who is very appreciative of anything that anybody does for me, period. I've never been raised to be entitled. It's really... what's the word I'm looking for? It's just, I wouldn't say bothersome so much, but it's more so just interesting to just see a lot of people be in that space. And, simultaneously we have the conversations of like, oh, Black people don't want to help one another, or, oh, Black people this, and it's like, this is what it is, right? It's Black people not realizing their privilege and not realizing that there are so many of our brothers and sisters who have not had that. I don't think people realize that. Like, there are so many Black people who are out here deprived. People, I don't know. And like I said, I think that that's what privilege is. It's like it makes you blind to certain things. You can easily be like, why this person ain't yada yada, but it's like they may be asking you a question that you feel like is remedial, but it's like they never had nobody teach them that. Okay, yeah, maybe you got that at 6, but they maybe have never had that. And I think that this is what really keeps us stuck sometimes. So all in all, don't be a mentor if you don't want to be a mentor. I believe that mentorship is definitely one of those things you have to do from your heart. I've always kind of loved teaching, from journalism, from being a teacher and so forth. Like, it just kind of ties into my overall passion and purpose. So I know it's not for everybody. That just goes for everything. Like, it's not for everybody. But it's unfortunate because I've just seen this be a very common thing with so many privileged people who get online and they just talk about this. And it's very sad because you just don't see it too often. And I'll also say this too. I think you have to look closely at that too. Like, people who don't want to mentor or people who share these type of opinions, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with it. Like I said, mentorship is not for everybody. But I'll say that, you have to look at it and you just kind of have to realize, like, some people don't have much to give. I think a lot of times we'll look at a person's life and we'll look at their fruit and we'll be like, oh my God, this person's super successful, or this person dressed like this, or this person X, Y, and Z. But that doesn't always mean that this person has a lifetime of accumulative experiences. It doesn't mean that this person possesses character. That doesn't mean that this person even possesses values that are in alignment with yours, right? I know for me, I value humility. A lot of people who may be in those positions don't value that, So you got to understand that success is not always this factor, or that it's not always this external attribute that is equivalent to character development or character enactment in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, just because a person has success or materialized success in any aspect, that doesn't make them the type of person who has character, you know? But I think because we just live in that world now, and we're also in a space where we are seeing Black people progress and do great things and open up businesses and, you know, do all these different things. We admire that. And I think that's another thing too. This is why I'm always tying everything back to African American history, because if you know the history, you will realize the deprivation. You'll realize the holes. And if you have any ties to your community, if you're a Black person, you're Black identifying, or you are someone who has, honestly, if you're a Black person and you know about your history, it'll just be a very natural thing for you to want to pour into those who are not where you are, or those who aspire to be where you are, because you'll realize that your privilege in the, you know, you getting out was not done merely by your own efforts and merits, right? Like, you've had a lot of factors that have contributed to this. And I think that this, because we glorify, let me not say we, but America, especially the entertainment industry. And I just think that first of all, the entertainment industry has a very interesting way of influencing every other culture. And I was reading Asada Shakur, and I just think that in her novel, it was really good, you know, but she was talking about how with art, literature, all these different things, we look at them as different subjects, where we really should classify them as one subject because they're all connected. And so when I think about entertainment, I think that entertainment has the greatest influence. And so that entertainment influences every other aspect of our lives, right? So when we look at entertainment industry, we see the influence culture. Well, what am I saying? We see the influencer culture and so forth. So it's just like, I just think that to an extent, I don't know. It's just like, if you can connect the dots and you can look at things objectively, you'll realize how you're pretty much in like, maybe like the 14%, you know? I don't think people realize that, you know, to have a successful business, or to be successful, or to be in any realm, right? Like, you've had some privilege. And like I said, because the entertainment industry glorifies the struggle, we've kind of adopted that ideology to where it's like everybody need to pull themselves up by the bootstrap, right? Everyone is self-made. This is what, you know, being self-made is what's respected and so forth, when that's not true. I look at, and this is not even really to compare, but every other culture has a very interesting way of working together in such a collaborative way, because you just can go further together. And so I think we need to start looking at that in terms of mentorship, and understand this too, you know, from my own personal experiences as being a mentor. Now I've worked with individual, like independent programs, and I can honestly say those are a little bit more challenging when you're assigned a mentor, because you guys didn't necessarily choose one another. It wasn't by fate. It wasn't by, you know, or maybe it could be if you look at it that way, but like, you know what I mean? It's more so like, okay, I'm here on an assignment, you know what I mean? So it's different versus like, okay, there is someone who has either been sent to me by a guy, or I have, you know, me and this person have met in divine, you know, connection, and on our paths have crossed, right? And so it's like, okay, I know for a fact that this may be a better fit. It's a little bit different, because I think when you have those forced mentorships, and I wouldn't even say forced, but more so assigned, you just have to kind of get to know one another, and you have to work out those differences, versus if you met someone who was just, you know, divinely kind of sent to you, and you guys, you know, cross paths or whatever, they felt courageous enough to DM you or reach out to you and so forth. I believe that from that perspective, the relationship could be a little bit more different. But yeah, I don't think everyone's called to mentorship, but I do think there's really something said about our unwillingness to help one another. And that's just period. And I remember saying this to myself before, and, you know, someone was telling me like, no, it's because, and here's the thing, nobody wants to help nobody who doesn't help themselves. Like, that's just period, right? Like I was really so big on that ideology at one point in my life, but learning about the history, recognizing my privilege, recognizing my own success, and, you know, being grateful and so forth. I think when you bless, just naturally, like innately, you want to give back to others. You know, I really do. And I really think it's something said about that. Like, it's just something about having so many blessings. Like, it just, I don't know. It's a different type of person who wants to keep all of that to themselves. I had to create a podcast, right? I had to share the things that I've learned, the things that I'm learning, you know what I mean? And it's just, I'm so grateful for that. I really am. And, for me, it gives me a sense of peace. It gives me a sense of just, but it's different for everybody. And, I understand, like I said, the work can be tiring. So I'll never negate that. But I just think that we really got to look at that. And I just think too often as Black people, we take those things for granted. We take for granted the privileges we've had, whether it has been, from a familial standpoint, from a childhood standpoint, or even just from a, exposure standpoint, experiences. And I just think sometimes we can be so self-absorbed in our own little worlds as people, especially today with Instagram and so forth. And it's, it's for our good to an extent, right? Because it's like there's so much going on in the world. I think it's better to just kind of like retreat, live in solitude, especially if you've like doing healing work and so forth. You'll find yourself isolated. And then I think that just kind of becomes your kind of like MO, your preference. And then you look up and everyone's validating this sense or this, this perpetual state of loneliness or, of isolation, which then leads to loneliness, which then leads to selfishness, which is, you know what I mean? Like it's this crazy ripple effect. So not everyone's called to it. But I think there's something said. And then I always say this too, because I was just talking about this. What was I talking about? Oh, on the last podcast episode. Yes, period. See? But you guys need to really start being mindful of the people you support. And the reason why I say that is because it's like, why support someone who doesn't give, And I'm not saying like they have to give everything, but like, just be mindful of like when you're pouring into something, like, is this something pouring into me? Is this a mutual thing? You know what I mean? Like, is this person pouring into me, or are they getting online telling me how they get irritated when I send them an email telling them, X, Y, and Z? And don't get me wrong, we're not going to be realistic. We're not going to be unrealistic. Not everyone has time to respond to every email. Not everyone has time to respond to very basic Google questions, right? I'm just talking about the heart posture. I'm talking about the spiritual element of it. I'm talking about the effect and the impact on not having role models and effective leaderships. Okay. On not having role models and effective leadership in the Black community and what this has done, right? So much of this ideology here with this lack of mentoring is what has caused the entertainment industry to be the main permeation. And I don't think people realize that, right? Like, to be a millionaire, to be a six-figure earner, to be someone who has a very successful and prosperous business, whether you're at 80K by yourself, that's a lot of money, period. It's a good amount of money to be by yourself. And you're making that in your business, 50K per year, right? And you're making that in your business and you don't want to share that with someone. You don't realize that you're like an exception to the rule. You're like a 1%er. You know what I mean? Not just in terms of, economic status, and you reaching a six-figure threshold, but in terms of your geography, and your just overall, like, being a Black person. You see what I'm saying? So sometimes we can absolutely be blinded to that. And it's okay. Like I said, the work is long and tiring. And I know, different realms I've had to throw my hands up and be like, yo, this is too much. But it's just important that we just be mindful of that, because when you have influence, you just never know who's watching. You never know who's listening. Peace. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, I'm calling all Black people out on recognizing their privilege. Yes, you may not have economic privilege, but you absolutely have some type of familial privilege, some type of friendship privilege, right? There are people who have someone, and there are some of us who have absolutely no one. So I'm calling you guys out. We're going to be talking about that in today's episode. And, I hope it ruffles your feathers. Like, I hope you really sit and think about it, because I think too often people are so quick to just be a little too, how can I put this? I don't want to say self-absorbed, but I just more so think not aware, right? And I just think it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know. People say what they want about social media, like, oh, I'm not, remember that era where everyone was like, oh, I'm not posting to flex. Like, I hope this is a motivation. Like, it's not. I hate to break it to you, babes, but it's not. And honestly, I think for me, it's just more so like, why do we feel the need to post these things on social media? You know, can we talk about that a little bit? No? Is that too much? Is that going to ruffle your feathers? Is that like what? Because I think that there was a time where it was like people were showcasing, oh crap, you can actually make money on YouTube, right? Like this is the rise. Well, let me not say the rise, because Jackie Aina was a good example of YouTube, but she's been there for a very long time. And like once she started, you know, kind of started profiting and so forth, better content, et cetera, sharing her, you know, whatever, she was well vetted in the game. But I'm more so thinking, well, no, because honestly, I think about that era, that had to be like 2019, 2017. We had like Tariq Ali. I remember his channel. He first got his Tesla, right? Everyone was getting Teslas, and like YouTube money was like big at the time. See, that era wasn't really a flex era, because people were realizing like, oh, right, we were really starting to see all the ways in which social media can be profitable. And I think that that's kind of what it did. So I think that it's just time to kind of step back, realize all the ways in which we're privileged. I think a lot of times people kind of look at the government and the economy as this pseudo thing that doesn't exist, but laws, rules, regulations, and bills and so forth, right? All those things do actually impact us as citizens. And so with the rise of inflation, this really happened at the peak moment where a lot of Black people were seeing a lot of money from their businesses, right? Entrepreneurship and so forth. And there were a lot of businesses who absolutely went under after COVID, right? My favorite bookstore, it was pretty much one of those businesses that never recovered, and they didn't get any extra funding and so forth. And I think about a lot of other businesses that kind of popped up during this time. There was like Moon Cosmetics. Now, I don't know too much about Moon Cosmetics. I did hear a lot of things concerning like professionalism and so forth, but just seeing how there was a rise, right, in entrepreneurship and in profit, and how so much of that has plummeted. And I think because too often, honestly, I think Black people can be a little bit more conspiracy. I think we have a common tendency to be a little bit more conspiracy. We conspiratorize. Wait, what am I trying to say? Conspiratorize? Is that a word? Conspiratorize. Okay, yeah. We tend to be a little bit more conspiratory. Is that a word? I think it's a word. We tend to be a little bit more conspiratory towards like our government and policies and laws and bills and, you know, politics and so forth. But we don't realize how these are the things that actually affect us in this country, right? As we are in a democracy. Yes. So I think it's important for us to kind of just wake up and realize our privileges. It's time to realize the things that we've had that other people did not have. And it's just certain advantages, right? Timing is everything. So I'm not necessarily talking solely about like, okay, you just started at this time, you were consistent, it worked out, it paid out for you. But if we're really being honest, there's so much more to that, right? I consider the factors of people who went to college. Now, not always, back, hold up. There are some exceptions to the rules, and I don't ever want to make content to make people feel like they are limited, or to feel like they cannot do something, or to feel like they cannot go off and be great with no resources, right? Because God will make a way, period. So that's never my vantage point. But what I want to say is, like, some people who go to college, coming from collegiate backgrounds with parents who went to college, or you have people who started really early in high school, right? They were very much, I want to say pushed, but maybe even supported or validated in some sense. They had some type of exposure where they had a certain high school that was very preparatory in terms of, like pre-college courses, and so forth, right? So there are a lot of things there, and I don't think we realize that. Like, too often we take opportunities for granted, and I think it's because we're so focused on time and we're so focused on accumulation that we don't realize our privilege. So let's talk about it.